Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Enablers. I'm Nadia Taslim and I'm back after quite long to talk about hot issue that developed in the international politics in the last few days. Now I myself am sitting amidst these snow-covered peaks, enjoying cool breeze, knowing the fact that many in the country, in different parts of the country, are facing scorching heat currently. So this is the dichotomy that we see in nature, and this is the dichotomy that we see in our day-to-day affairs. Be it the case of large number of people who drowned and lost their lives in Greece, and their voices largely remained unheard, or the kind of episode that occurred with the Titanic sub grabbing the attention of the world and somehow leading the world to invest or to spend a lot of resources for rescue missions of that particular sub. So again, there was a dichotomy. Though the people in both cases lost their lives, their families suffered. But the reaction of the world clearly indicates the kind of dichotomy that we face in our day-to-day affairs as well as in the larger international politics. Why I am emphasizing on this dichotomy is actually because if we see at the Russian case, if we see the way an attempt to mutiny actually started in Russia, we again see an interesting dichotomy over there. Because the man, Pragosan, who actually was the leader of this whole mutiny or a kind of rebellious movement, he had been considered as one of the closest allies of Vladimir Putin, and means for quite long. So, as the story unfolds, we see a lot of interesting things that happen, and that is the stuff that we need to talk about right now. Now, this episode means first thing that I would be talking about in today's episode would actually be to unfold what happened on ground. Who was Pragosan? What is Wagner Group? And how they turned to be so powerful that they were able to even challenge the authority of the most authoritarian leader, and somehow they created a kind of wave across the globe in which many welcomed this development and some even criticized it, and of course extended their full support to Putin, like Turkey or like even Saudi Arabia. So in the second episode, we would be talking about the deep analysis of what can be repercussions of this particular episode on Russia, on Russian-Ukrainian war, and on the larger global arena. So let me quickly talk about what happened and what was this whole mutiny all about. Apparently, we see that Russia has been engaged in a war in Ukraine for quite some time now. International community, of course, and particularly the Western world, has been strongly critical of the Russian involvement in Ukraine. They have their own interest, of course. But if we look at the way Russians were carrying this war, we see that Russians were carrying this war not only on the basis of their own military forces, but also they had included more than 40 other groups who were not directly involved in the government, or who are not actually considered as the government institute, part of any of the government institute, rather have been working as separate independent groups and have been taken their own salaries. So we call them to be the mercenary groups. Wagner Group is one of those mercenary groups being headed by Pragosan. This group has been actively indulged in Russia-Ukraine war, and it actually got prominence primarily because of this war. Now, if we just try to look back when this group emerged as a mercenary group and started taking active part in the Russian adventures in different parts of the world, we see its somehow rise in 2014 when Russia invaded, or when Russian troops actually intervened in Crimea. From then onwards, this mercenary group got active part in different maneuvers. Like they were involved in Libya, they were involved in Syria, they were involved in Central African Republic, and in all of those areas, Russians somehow at the government level, they did not own their involvement in any of these regions. However, this Russian-sponsored mercenary group has been actively indulged in it. They had made an interesting mechanism to recruit people in their mercenary group, and that was that they had been taking in the prisoners from Russian prisons, and they had been recruiting them in their means as mercenary forces. So, um, as a result of this, they started turning to be strong and powerful, and they had been working in collaboration with the Russian military and Russian government, of course. Here, before moving ahead with what happened, what led them to get into this mutiny, let me quickly talk about this man, Prigozhin himself. Prigozhin has an interesting background, and again, there we see a kind of dichotomy because Prigozhin is a man who had been in prison for more than a decade in the 1980s. When he got released, and because of some robberies in 1990, when he got released, he started a small a kind of business endeavor related to food, and he started supplying food, and that actually enhanced to the scale that ultimately he was the man who was supplying all this food stuff to the Russian, even military messes and some of the Russian schools. And he had turned to be the close, he was even being termed as Putin's chef. So even right now, some of the analysts have been calling him to be the ex-Putin chef. So that man got prominence and he turned to be the leading figure behind these mercenary forces. But the interesting part is that Prigozhin never disclosed his identity, being the head of the Wagner's group, till Russian involvement in Ukraine. Prior to that, he even denied whenever there were some reports claiming him to be behind Wagner group, he denied those reports. It was the Ukraine war which brought him in prominence and which somehow disclosed his identity in that way. Now, apparently, means I would talk about there are two things that we need to highlight here. Apparently, this Wagner group led by Prigozhin had some differences with the Russian military forces and Russian commander-in-chief and Russian defense ministry, and they claimed, and they actually accused them of corruption, and they claimed that we are losing our people just because of their corruption, and they're not providing us with enough arms and ammunition. So as a result of this, they've been somehow getting their complaints registered via voice messages time and again for the last few months. Since then, these things never got into notice, or they were not being means this man Putin did not respond to them. So they ultimately they decided to launch a kind of mutiny, not apparently not against Putin, but against the military chief and the military structure of Putin. So um, this is his take, and this is what he says. So they made this claim when their troops marched into Rostov-on-Don, the Russian city, which is means important because of the kind of military installations that it has. He decided to move towards Moscow, and the troops they started their march. However, within few hours, the Brussels president intervened as a middleman, and he offered safe exit to Prigozhin and his some of his means obviously close allies within the this Wagner group, and because of this, a kind of deal was signed. Initially, Putin was hard on them, and he said that he is going to punish them, and he actually charged them with treason as well, which of course Pragozhin denied. And so ultimately this issue got resolved and apparently resolved, and they decided to take exit towards Brussels, and so they left the city of Rostov-on-Don as well. Now, what is the take of what is the other side of the coin? The other side of the coin is that this man was losing influence in the Russian government. The Russian military commander had changed in January, and the Russian defense minister now he also wanted these groups to sign proper contract with the defense ministry, so they should operate actually under the Russian defense ministry, and they should be accountable to them. So this notification was issued on 10th June, and the march started. Apparently, the mutiny started on 23rd June. So now the interesting thing is that Some of the analysts claim that this man was losing his ground in Russia and in Russian government circle. He now was in direct confrontation with the defense ministry, and this led him to confront them, and this led him ultimately to launch a mutiny, which can be regarded as a battle of survival for him. Now, it's up to Putin. Means, of course, whatever the case was, the important thing or the point of concern for the for the international community and for the whole world and for the Russians themselves is that what are going to be the repercussions of this particular episode on the power of Putin particularly. Then, of course, there are some other questions need to be addressed, that what is going to be the future of Russian-Ukraine war, because this man even condemned in his messages, he has condemned Russian operations in Ukraine currently, despite the fact that he has been the lead man in Ukraine. So this has led Ukrainian president to talk about Russian policies and to criticize Russian policies here in Ukraine. So this episode clearly leads to many other questions that need to be addressed, and we have to come up with our next episode to talk about all these issues. Thank you so much. Stay blessed.